Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Spar&Brawl. Israeli and Lebanese officials have met for the first time in 40 years. Yes, you heard that right. They actually met for the first time in 40 years to discuss non war matters. The two countries, officials from the two countries, met on Wednesday. The whole thing was mediated by the United States, and it took the US apparently 3 years to put this meeting together in order for the two countries to discuss some dispute around maritime borders. So the issue here seems to be about natural gas. This is what really pushed the two officials from both sides to kind of put all of their differences aside for once and actually meet. So Hezbollah and other parties from Lebanon were quick to come out and highlight that these talks, this specific meeting around maritime border issues, are not to be understood as being some kind of normalization or steps towards normalization of relations between the two countries, which have fought multiple times in the past. The most recent war was between Hezbollah and Israel in 2006. But it seems like it is very much a step in the right direction. And before we open up this talk more and talk about the regional dynamics of it, and especially where natural gas sits in this specific story and conversation, I want to first Sam if he has any specific details regarding this meeting or Lebanon and Israel and the relations between the two countries that you want to add.
Um, yeah, interestingly, well, it was very interesting considering that we've actually covered a lot of news about gas fields in Eastern Mediterranean, and a lot of report about this meeting was that Israel and Lebanon and Palestinians, to an extent, are trying to find a way to resolve their border issues, or at least their maritime border issues, and settle those so they can further explore and perhaps develop, gas fields in the sea and extract more and more gas, basically. So a lot of people seem to suggest that this round of talks, which was quite unique in its own way after 30 years. I think it was the first, as you mentioned, the first non-military related or non-war related talk between the two countries. So a lot of people were speculating that it is influenced by the increased competition over the gas fields in the Eastern Mediterranean. That was one aspect. Another aspect was that Hezbollah, even though they didn't block, which I believe technically they could have, because the president of Lebanon, uh, he's not from Hezbollah, but he's from I believe, Amal group that is very close to Hezbollah. But they could have blocked these talks, but they haven't. But they have been criticizing it pretty heavily. They have criticized that there hasn't been they have criticized their representatives from Lebanon, and they, even though the representatives have emphasized that these are all technical talks, they're not about normalization, they're not about, recognition or any of that. But Hezbollah has criticized them, and they have criticized lack of military presence within the negotiating team from Lebanon. I think they would have preferred more people from the military or from the security forces on the Lebanese side. But at the same time, they have allowed it to happen. So they must at least strategically support it. Because I think they do see that it's more about the, again, just if they can develop, a gas industry there, it would benefit them heavily as well. So I would imagine they see more benefit in continuing the talks, even though they are criticizing it.
Yeah, no, I think you can really sense here that business and possibly any kind of revenue from natural gas with Trump, all these other kind of concern that Hezbollah and other parties would have. So from what I read, there are two gas fields that Israel is already starting to develop in that area. Do you know if Lebanon has any, or whether they're hoping they can get their hands on some of what Israel is doing right now? Or they're just hoping, well, we have to get this going and then we're going to find our own gas reserves around our borders.
Uh, from what I understand, Lebanon had their first offshore gas drill was a huge problem, a huge disappointment. It didn't yield like as much as they had estimated it would have. That's what happened. To be honest, no, I don't know about the details of the like. I know again, yeah, Israel has two massive oil fields, which I'm gonna come back to actually
Gas
when we
fields, sorry.
gas fields. Sorry. Uh, yeah, I'm gonna come back to because it kind of relates to a story that is connected to all this. But I don't know if these talks, I imagine, this is my guess, these talks is more about areas that are disputed and nobody has done anything in.
Mm-hmm.
Like more like the Greek Turkey situation where there are these areas that are disputed. Nobody has basically anything in them. They have things around them, but they don't have things in them. So I think it's more about those things, probably. But I'm not sure. I have to look into that.
Okay, so you mentioned Turkey Greece. Should we segue to how the whole Turkey Greece dynamic relates to this story as well, or did you have anything particular to add about Israel or Lebanon or this specific meteor?
Uh, be, yeah, I think before we segue to that, it's a good place to actually segue to the Israel. Is, I mean, just it seems to be honest, this week's overall theme is going to be the Eastern Mediterranean gas fields, I think, to be honest. As to be honest, you could argue the theme of a lot of our episodes because it seems to become the hotspot for a lot of competition. But I believe yesterday or the day before, Israel made in my view, a big announcement, but it has flown under the radar somewhat. They announced that for years Chevron has been trying to Chevron, a giant energy company from America. They've been trying to acquire Israeli energy companies, and they have finally acquired a company called Noble Energy, which operates in Israel gas fields, Leviathan and I believe Tamara, if I'm not mistaken. These are the two gas fields operated by Israel off of its coast. And when Netanyahu announced it to the parliament, he did it. He did it. He said, "We have been waiting for this to happen for 72 years," which I had no idea it was such a big deal. But it seemed to have been a important a step for him that Chevron has finally acquired Israeli energy company. He also related. He said this would have not had happened if it weren't for Israeli peace deal with UAE and Bahrain, which was interesting. Which may be an exaggeration on his part, maybe him trying to basically over emphasize his role in the Chevron deal, but also maybe true. Maybe shareholders who would have objected to the deal, or people who would have objected to the deal because of the strained relationships with UAE, because UAE has a lot of investment in the US as well, or Bahrain to a lesser extent. So maybe they would have objected to the deal if it weren't for the peace deal between Israel and UAE. Maybe. But it also kind of shows if America gets involved in the conflict, where their interest and where their royalties will sort of lie. If the conflict with Turkey gets more and more heated, because as we mentioned in previous episodes, there was a sort of a what they called Mediterranean Opec formed, which included Greece, Israel, Lebanon, and even Palestinian authorities, and I believe even UAE, which was very odd because UAE doesn't have anything to do with Mediterranean Sea. So you can see this bloc emerging, with Israel probably being the most powerful against and with support of America, and on the other side you have Turkey. So yeah, it seems there are a lot of developments happening at the same time in regard to the gas fields in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Yeah, I think I don't know. To me, it kind of makes sense that perhaps was a factor and push it, because other things we've heard about the deal, which was if the Emiratis wanted to buy F-35 jets, apparently the one of the conditions was for this to happen. So it makes sense. It kind of falls within that line, and when it comes to facilitating business and commerce between Israel and the UAE, the deal seems to have very much done this. I was also reading how Israelis are now trying to buy an airline company which is based in Dubai and the UAE. It's not owned by an Emirati, but it is based there, and they're trying to buy it, as well as numerous other, both symbolic but also major business interactions that have taken place between the two countries, which we have mentioned. So it kind of makes sense. But you said one thing. You said this will show that if there's a conflict, where the U.S. alliance lies here. For once, I'm not too sure. So do you mean that they will back Israel, or rather they would kind of try to stay out of it and say that we don't want a conflict? I'm not too sure I got that.
Oh, I think to be honest, I think right now US, I mean, it will very much depends on probably who will the next president is going to be. Uh, if it's Joe Biden, I think they would be a slightly more, I don't, to be honest, can't say that, like, you can generalize too much, but there may be more, they may get more involved in the Eastern Mediterranean issue with Joe Biden compared to Trump. But I think they are generally on a retreat from the international stage. But if they do get more involved in this specific issue, they would probably side with the whole Mediterranean OPEC, with Greece and Israel and all that. And to be honest, at the same time, though, it's quite interesting because at the same time, US is trying to sell its own liquefied gas to Europe. So at the same time, they may try to sabotage the whole thing, just because if it does, I mean, the whole point of the Eastern Mediterranean gas is it's an alternative energy source for Europe, which is the biggest right now. Is pretty much dependent on Russia for its energy. So they are looking for alternatives in Turkey, in Iran, even in Eastern Mediterranean. But so yeah, I think if the conflict heats up, it's more likely for US to take the side of the Greece, Israel, and interestingly Lebanon, Palestine side, which on this issue they've come together.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. The dynamics, the countries that we're talking about, and they're meeting with each other, they're so counterintuitive and just combinations that you never thought you'd put together. But okay, you've mentioned Turkey and Greece about 10
But
times. Yeah.
before we go to Turkey and this, I like just in terms of, because I don't, to be honest, I mean these alliances and all that, I don't really have like a lot of people have been criticizing Lebanon or Palestinian Authority for. I personally don't care. Like, I think you have to, it's politics. You have to, do business with everyone. But what I do think is important about Chevron, especially, uh, this is from Knesset, the Parliament of Israel. Internal Affairs and Environmental Committee heard that Chevron had left the trail of environmental and humanitarian disasters around the world, with 65 cases of litigation against the company in just 31 countries surveyed. 31 countries were looked at, and there was 65 cases of litigation, law cases, blah blah blah. So I think that's probably the worst part, that you have a company with this type of background coming into the region, and it's hailed as a fantastic development. But yeah. So sorry, that was just my
Yeah. No, no,
environmental.
no.
Yeah.
100%. And we'll wrap up this whole segment with a small conversation about natural gas and energy and the environment, maybe.
Sure, yeah, that would be a great idea. I think, yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay, so now please tell us a bit why you've mentioned Turkey and Greece 10 times so far.
So, well, to be honest, there is not much development in the Turkey-Greece
But sorry,
situation.
first give an overview, a very quick overview.
Sure. Well, as we discussed in previous weeks, Turkey and Greece have been the conflict between Turkey and Greece has escalated over the disputed maritime borders in the Aegean Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean. Turkey has been making independence deals with Libya and some other, pretty much Libya. With Libya, Greece has joined with Israel, Lebanon, Palestinian authorities, UAE, backed by EU, pretty much. Greece, especially backed by France as a EU member. Uh, they've been disputing over the rights to explore and control uh, uh, gas fields in the Eastern Mediterranean. Greece claims to basically pushes its based on international law. Greece's position seems to be more correct, but Turkey claims that the international law and at the time of the World War One was written in a way to trap Turkey in not allow it to use its what do you say, its rightful water, maritime waters, whatever. So that's basically the dispute. It's about control over water, and it's about control over gas. Recently, Turkey has been more belligerent. They have been sending exploration ships accompanied by military ships to different areas, and they've been, as I mentioned before, making deals. This led to Greece making its own deals with Egypt, with others. With At the same time, Turkey's relations with France has significantly deteriorated. Both in Libya, uh, France and Turkey disagree, and now in the case of the whole Greece thing, France has been selling jet airplanes to Greece. Uh, in Libya, France and Turkey are, supporting different factions. So it's a complete, basically, international shit show, to be honest. Um, and yeah. Oh, and the updates we have for this week is that even though there are talks between Turkey and Greece going on, both sides have sort of escalated their rhetoric, and a ship from Turkey just set sail for further exploration in disputed maritime areas, accompanied by military ships. A Turkish Navy general came out and gave a big speech saying that, it's our duty to protect our scientific community and our scientific work. So that was
Interesting.
interesting. No, in a way, um, very interesting. At the same time, Greece is increasingly calling for EU and international sanctions, and I believe if Turkey does push a bit more, I believe there was an incident that Turkey may have forced the Greek airplane to stop. It may have been it may be a technical thing. It may not have been related to this. But all these things signal increased tensions, which could lead to a situation where EU sanctions are automatically uh, come to being in case of a Greece-Turkish outright conflict.
So EU sanctions against Turkey.
Yeah, yeah.
Could EU has there even been any EU sanctions against Turkey?
In the past,
Yeah.
to be honest, I really haven't checked on that, but I think they may have been because of. I mean, it may have not been EU. It may have been the like this some in its former forms, because Turkey was a dictatorship for such a
Mm-hmm.
long time. But at I think at the moment it would be very difficult.
Yeah.
It is. That's why Germany is very much opposed, it seems, to that idea, because of the first of all, Turkey has become a bigger part of the European economy and global economy, and secondly, because of the refugee issues and all that. So
Yeah, I know exactly. I can't see that really being a way out for the Europeans or for Greece.
To be honest, I would imagine the like some of the sanctions maybe you can always find a way to sanction a country in a very benign, and you sanction specific figures or very like specific industries that don't really you have any trade with. So it's
Like how
possible
the
to get away.
Europeans, yeah, like how the Europeans over the whole poisoning of the Russian diplomat, they've come out and they've
Oh yeah,
sanctioned, I don't know, like five or
yeah.
six. Who knows who the who
So we're
this was?
gonna sanction Russia's uh wig industry. We no more Russian wigs. But we need the fucking gas, so no, we're not sanctioning. Yeah.
No,
But uh, sorry, what were we talking about?
but that was it. That really sanctions don't seem to be
Oh yeah.
a reasonable solution or mechanism for the Europeans and for Greece to get it the way. So yeah, we have to see, right? So I guess there haven't been any further talks, and in fact, the Turkey has again sent ships to explore the gas field, accompanied by military ships. That's pretty much the latest where we stand.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, the kind of reason why I kind of tied it to the whole gas thing was that I think it leads to our next story very well, which is the,
But I mean,
uh,
even so far, sorry to interrupt you, but even so far, I mean, gas brought Lebanon and Israel together.
yeah,
And then again,
together.
this issue, like, I mean, there's obviously a major connection with gas. And we'll come back to gas. Sorry, continue.
No, yeah, to be honest, we can talk about gas actually right now if you want, because I
Yeah.
was gonna kind of go into the whole Azeri situation, Azeri Armenian situation.
I mean, I didn't have anything really groundbreaking to say, but just like you've said, these past few shows, since we started the show, we've talked a lot about natural gas and the importance of natural gas. And I was kind of looking at, global production of energy and what our sources are. And off camera, you were telling me how you've been to one or two talks where they've been representative from the energy sector, and they said that this century is going to be the gas century, and everything is really pointing that way. I mean, I was still shocked at seeing how little renewable energy is responsible for energy production, and even more shocked at how little of that is from solar. So a lot of it is from burning biomass and other types of energy sources which aren't typically talked about, but they're considered as renewable. Then the next big one was wind, and then there was, it seems like, I wonder if solar, like the percentage of solar energy has probably barely gone up over the past few years or the decade. Whereas when it comes to natural gas, it has more than doubled over the past 20 years, and they didn't start at like 5%. So now I think around 30% of energy production comes from natural gas. And all these stories that we're talking about, it points in that direction, that environmentalists, and for the climate, of course, it seems that solar will be much better. Natural gas has less CO2 emissions, but only about 50 or 25%. Sorry, 50 or 75% less than oil and coal, somewhere between that, which is not negligible, but I mean, it emits a lot of energy. And it really seems like, environmentalists, we think that people who care about the environment, climate, they think that the jump is going to be from oil to solar, but nothing is really pointing in that direction.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, I've made my position clear in previous weeks. But yeah, I think, yeah, I completely agree. The next 100 years seem to be dominated by gas. And interestingly, though, I mean, this was a few years ago. Was the a lot of people were saying that or have written about that. I need to look at specific sources for this for future episodes. But there was a lot of talks that the whole Syrian civil war, which I mean, some of the protests originally uh, may have been, you know, uh, what do you say, organically came about. But I think at some point it did become at very early on, it became basically a factional war between the Americans and the Iranians, or that type of thing, Saudi Arabia and Iran. And a lot of people were saying that it is about gas, basically, because if Saudis or Americans were controlling Syria, they could have a pipeline, gas pipeline going from Saudi Arabia to Europe through perhaps through Turkey, perhaps through Lebanon and the sea. On the other hand, like you would have Iran, which wouldn't want that. So because Iran wants to sell its own gas to Europe or whatever. I mean, I do think it's a bit of a reductionist argument to say that was all the Syrian war was about. It was about a, combination of internal, external factors. But I do think those type of thinkings probably played a big role in a lot of a lot of powerful people's calculations. I would imagine more than we think, much more than probably the uses of chemical weapons come into the calculation of the powerful. Usually, I think these are more important, these are more of a driving factor in international politics, for better or for worse. But yeah, basically, it seems to become gas is becoming increasingly extremely a strategic energy.
No, exactly. And we're going to put a few graphics and videos that I've found that really show how much more gas production has increased over the years. But 100% what you say again makes total sense. I mean, the speed at which the Syrian civil war turned into a proxy war, there must have been some powerful interest, which usually have to do with energy and these kind of industries. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and to be honest, you mentioned that you're gonna put on some pictures and charts about the increased role of gas. You can look at Qatar, and you literally probably can. I would imagine you can see a correlation between the rise of Qatar in terms of influence and power in the region and the increased market for gas, because Qatar's money and Qatar's funding is largely coming from its gas fields in the Persian Gulf. So, yeah.
yeah, very true. And just a little small other point on the whole sad story that seems to be solar energy. I was just thinking of this the other day, that some people, including myself, might have gotten the impression that given, now there are electric cars, a lot of hybrid cars, there's Tesla out there and other companies want to make electric cars. We just covered this story about California banning the production and the sale of new gas powered cars starting 2030. However, these cars are simply electric cars. Nobody says anywhere that this source of energy has to be solar. So it's just like a distinction that we need to make. And even if all cars become electric cars, then it's still, where are we getting the energy for the electricity? It will probably remain coal, gas, maybe some places hydropower, and
I
yeah,
mean,
and oil.
at least this was something when I was a kid I never paid attention to that. Yeah, exactly. That the energy for electronic cars, or because I was always into that stuff. All like there are basically powerhouses that are powering our cities, and yeah, unless they are changed to a more environmentally friendly energy or more whatever more efficient system, unless they change, other stuff is a small time.
Yeah. And of course, it will make a difference if we have more electric cars, because they don't emit emissions themselves, but there will be emissions in the process of turning the energy into electricity. But in some places, it might be very little. For instance, I know that in Quebec and Canada, around 80 or 90% of their electricity, a very high amount, comes from hydropower. So there, if you have electric cars, then you can see a much more cleaner, you can say, at least in terms of CO2 emissions throughout the lifespan. So from where the electricity comes and then going into the electric car.